Blackstone Audio presents Candles Burning by Tabitha King and Michael McDowell. Chapter 1. My father died unpleasantly. Mama put it that way. My husband died, she used to say, letting her voice catch before concluding, unpleasantly. Stepping on a wasp barefoot, that's unpleasant. A mouthful of sour milk, that's unpleasant. What happened to Daddy was no mere unpleasance. It was murder, and not a cozy one, not the butler in the library with a revolver, not a bloodless, painless game of clues with a polite, high-class suicide to avoid the common gallows at the end. I was 7 years old when Daddy died. I did not entirely understand the nature of Daddy's death, nor did I accept its finality. His death was an event that had happened to me and to Mama and to my brother Ford. The realization that it had happened to Daddy came only with the passage of time. The pictures of the bloody footlocker that made the cover of what turned out to be the last issue of True Sex Crimes, the stories that appeared in that grimy little scandal sheet and its trashy ilk, Savage Real Crimes, 20th Century Gru, were successfully kept from my eyes until much later. Recently, I have read or reread all the newspaper and periodical clippings and the popular psychological forensics farragos, such as Dr. Myers's 1975 publication Sexual Pathology and the Homicidal Impulse, which included a chapter entitled Footlocker, Broomstick, and Cleaver. The unspeakably cruel details of Daddy's death quickly defeated the cynical attitude with which I had armored myself. Mama's once ludicrous euphemism now lodges sharp as a fishbone in my throat. The women who actually murdered Daddy were caught. They were tried. They were judged guilty and sentenced to die in the electric chair. Even in Louisiana in 1958, it was rare for women to be executed, but what they did to my father was, in the opinion of the judge, an unimaginably heinous atrocity against nature. But the two guilty women did not die by electrocution. Judy DeLuca was murdered in the prison laundry, slit open from throat to crotch with a razor blade embedded in the handle of a toothbrush. When Janice Hicks, housed in a different wing of the same prison in Baton Rouge, heard of her friend's death, she began to gasp frantically. She was dead before a doctor could be summoned. The autopsy showed that her lungs were full of water. Seawater. Chapter 2. My name is Calley Dakin. I was christened Calliope Carol Dakin. Every time I ever asked Mama why she named me Calliope, she spun a new and blatant lie, from the lackadaisical to the sadistic. Calliope was the name of the best friend in college who had proved to be treacherous, or of the childhood doll that had always had an odd smell, or the forbidden creek where a naughty child was bitten by a water moccasin, and when the body was recovered, the snake was inside the child's mouth. I discovered for myself that a calliope is a 19th century steam organ associated with circuses, and that Calliope is the classical Greek muse of epic poetry. At my first opportunity, I informed Mama of these facts. I had no idea, said Mama in a flat, sarcastic tone. If only I had had an inkling. From my earliest babyhood, Daddy took me to the circus as often as one showed up within reasonable reach, so that I came to know the range of sounds of the calliope. No one could call it a delicate instrument, but I did admire its great rowdy wind. Mama never went with us. She had an allergy to hokum, she said. It was some years before I was disabused of the notion that hokum was some kind of plant like ragweed that provoked people to sneeze and swell up. Mama was born Roberta Ann Carroll. The Carrolls were a very old Alabama family, very high in Alabama, as high as you could get without actually being the current governor or so rich that people in other states had heard of you. Mama never let me forget that I was a Carroll, or that I was failing to measure up to being one. But my last name was Dakin. The Dakins were very low in Alabama, as low as you could get without being colored. The Dakins had never amounted to anything, Mama always said. They were not quality. Without history, without standing, they might as well have hailed from the backside of the moon. The only things they did have were hillbilly accents and boys. There were no Dakin girls, just family after family of Mama Dakin, Daddy Dakin, and 4, 5, 6, or in the case of Daddy's Mama and Daddy, 7 little boy Dakins. So why did Roberta Carroll marry Joe Kane Dakin? Because, unlike all the other Dakins in Alabama, Daddy was rich. Though his name actually was Joe, Mama called him Joseph. She asserted that it was typically ignorant of the Dakins to put a nickname on a birth certificate. Daddy's brothers were Jimmy Kane Dakin, Timmy Kane Dakin, Tommy Kane Dakin, Lonnie Kane Dakin, Dickie Kane Dakin, and Billy Kane Dakin. Mama claimed that the middle name was because they were all born in a cane field. Daddy told me that it was his mama's lesson to them all, so they would not forget the stain of Cain upon the human race. The misspelling was of no import. The idea of spelling as a strict science never penetrated very deeply among the barely literate like Daddy's mama, or the illiterate like his daddy. Indeed, it is an idea that begins now to seem a quaint affectation. I have seen the signature of Daddy's father on county documents signed variously as Cyrus, Cyrus, Cyrus with an S, and even Sire's Dakin. He had the Dakin down cold. It was his Christian name that was a speculation every time. Daddy's mama signed the family Bible in neat printing, Burma Moses. Daddy's mama was herself an orphan, raised in an orphanage operated by the Daughters of the Pharaoh. They were a peculiar and now extinct offshoot of the Eastern Star, but while they existed, they sent all their charges out into the world, bearing the last name of Moses. No doubt her orphan soul, like the 2 large shoes she was given to wear away from the orphanage, could hardly avoid picking up the odd pebble of a religious enthusiasm. I never knew Cyrus or Burma Moses Dakin, or Daddy's brother Tommy Kane Dakin, who died of whooping cough when he was 4, or his other dead brother Timmy Kane Dakin, who died in his late 20s from a mule kick in the head, not before he had a chance to leave a widow and 4 boys under the age of 7. Daddy was the youngest. He started out with nothing, and as little education as rural Alabama could in those days provide. Daddy had a knack for fixing cars. From his early teens, he would have 6 or 7 broke-down Model Ts or baling-wired farm trucks in the yard of his widowed mama's dog trot. He scrounged parts from junkyards and cannibalized hopeless wrecks. Nobody in rural Alabama had much by way of currency or coin in the middle of the Depression, so the owners of the rattletraps he put back on the road paid him as often in barter, a chicken, a sack of sweet potatoes, a ham, a bundle of firewood, as cash. The quarters and 50-cent pieces and dollars came sweaty and slow, but once won, they did not escape his grasp. An automobile dealer from Montgomery, Mr. Horace H. Fancy, heard of him and offered him a job as a mechanic. With Burma Moses Dakin recently gone to glory, Daddy did not have any reason to stick where he was. Mr. Fancy discovered that Daddy was more than a natural-born grease monkey. Joe Kane Dakin was a natural-born salesman, too, and as honest as an August noon in Alabama is hot. People liked him. They came away feeling that for once they were not being cheated. Mr. Fancy realized that he had found the man for whom he had been looking, the very one to take over his business so he could retire. Mr. Fancy taught Daddy the automobile business. And not just the business. Mr. Fancy saw to it that Daddy got a library card and educated himself. Mr. Fancy's wife was dead, but he had a widowed sister, Miss Lulu Taylor, keeping house for him, and she took it on herself to teach Daddy proper manners and diction and everything else that he needed to pass for a country gentleman. Mama liked to tease Daddy that Miss Lulu must have been sweet on him, but Daddy said she was just an old retired schoolteacher who missed the schoolroom.